Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey, and this is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
We're going to be chatting about the Supreme Court of Canada rejecting Jordan Peterson's appeal to his re-education sentencing, the UK riots bringing Orwell's 1984 to life, ISIS militants getting Canadian citizenship, Liberal MP blaming the far right and Trump for her own failures, the WHO director considering a public health emergency over monkeypox, and World War III possibly being ignited by tensions in the Middle East. However, if before we get into things, you wouldn't mind subscribing to our channel and tossing a thumbs up on this video as it helps this podcast grow, that would be greatly appreciated. All right, let's get started. So first off, we've got Supreme Court of Canada won't hear Jordan Peterson's appeal of professional colleges' re-education orders. Jordan Peterson's legal challenge against a mandated social media training order has been dismissed by Canada's highest court, leaving many questioning the absurdity of the charges brought against him. The Supreme Court of Canada offered no explanation for its decision to reject Peterson's appeal, effectively ending his legal options in the country. Peterson, a prominent psychologist at the University of Toronto, was ordered by the College of Psychologists of Ontario to undergo social media training on professionalism. The order came after the CPO received complaints about his social media posts, which they claimed could be degrading to the profession and potentially amounted to professional misconduct. What's striking is that these complaints were about posts Peterson made in his personal capacity, not as a practicing clinical psychologist, especially considering he hasn't seen patients since 2017. Despite this, the CPO insists that Peterson, a highly influential figure in social media, needs re-education by individuals who likely have far less expertise in the area than he does. Is freedom of speech in Canada facing death by 1,000 cuts?
Well, I actually think freedom of speech is facing death by 1,000 cuts in the West. And I think we already know it's been sacrificed in the East long ago, in a lot of places, right? My concern here really is that the CPO is operating with authority outside of their jurisdiction. And what I mean is they're allowed to force him into a re-education camp, essentially, is what it is. But they're able to do it even though he was not operating in his professional capacity, right? So this is where it gets a little funny. None of what he was saying had anything to do with psychology. It was his own social media platform, not to anybody, not to any clients or anybody he was seeing.
So there's actually 3 instances in particular that they came down on him for. One was him talking about the issues with the current quote unquote consensus within climate data. And then another was him supposedly dead naming Elliot Page.
That's ridiculous.
And then also him saying that, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something negative about that Sports Illustrated cover that had the extremely plus-sized woman on the cover of it.
So all very valid stuff. And what frustrates me is that, like exactly like I said, they're able to operate with impunity outside of their jurisdiction, and they're getting the court to either back their decisions, which we've seen prior to this, or throw out any opposition altogether, which is what happened here. It's its own case, but the problem I'm seeing with this is outside of the realm of the College of Psychologists. For me, this is significant. And when you are a part of a group like that, it kind of operates like a corporation. There's a different set of rules. So for example, if you work for a corporation and you were shit talking that company, well, they could let you go. That makes sense. That actually tracks. But this is outside of that capacity. So for me, to see them get this kind of power, you're like, okay, so what's next? And not only that, it really bothers me that the courts are backing this, but it's what does the self-censorship do now? Anybody with any sort of medical degree in anything, now they're on watch, every single one of them.
Yeah, well, I think this is a warning shot because it's one of those things where, well, hey, if we can come after Jordan Peterson, who definitely has more resources because now with how publicly known he is, he's definitely making a lot of money. And so it's one of those things where, hey, if we can take this person down, let's say they drag him out in legal battles. Obviously, this one isn't getting brought to that. Actually, what's crazy is I do think, I was listening to him on a podcast, if I understood him correctly, he has to pay out of pocket for this training.
So he may, but one other thing I forgot to mention, you may have touched on it, is, and I love this, he's going to do the training. He's going to document the whole thing. this is going to blow back on them so hard. So it's just going to be so ridiculous. They're trying to penalize this guy, and he's going to make their entire organization into a pariah. So I mean, at least there's that. You know what I mean? It was funny. I don't know if it was Joe Rogan I was listening to him on, but he was just saying like, hey, he was really pushing back and really upset and really annoyed with this. And he goes, wait a minute, it's an opportunity. I'm going to light you guys on fire. So there will be a silver lining.
Yeah, he did a talk with his daughter. They did like a 30-minute short podcast after the ruling came out about a day later or whatever, and just kind of talked about the scenario. And yeah, one of the things that he was saying is he was like, okay, I've done everything I can to try to make this go away quietly. And he said, so now I guess my only real appeal is to just warn whoever thinks they can come in and re-educate me, don't. Like, this is not going to go well for you. It's going to happen publicly. There will be pushback for sure. I'm not going to incite it, but it's going to happen. There's going to be a lot of people that are upset that this situation is even occurring, and you will take the brunt for that. And it is very, very true. But this goes again to something, this collectivism, this Marxism, this socialist ideology that has already infiltrated our institutions. Every single one of these totalitarian regimes, whether it's Mao's China or whether it's Stalin's Soviet Union or anything of the sorts, they employ these re-education training programs because they think that they have a right way to think, and then that people in general need to go along with it. This is actually something Friedrich Hayek pointed out really well, is that when you have a population, in central planning is the goal. So right now we've got it. The main one is around climate change, right? Well, you're never going to be able to get consensus among millions upon millions of people or there's not going to be one goal amongst those people in order to centrally plan for. So if you want to centrally plan, it requires that you propagandize and educate people and essentially brainwash them into working for your one goal. There is no opposite. It's actually baked into that idea of, okay, we need to tackle this as a collective. Well, then you need to root out individual opinion and voices.
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of those things, and you talk about them a lot in terms of where they come from in literature, and they're very sensationalized in those moments because it's a book that's 300 pages. So you get a lot of it right at once. Obviously, things are drawn out a little differently in society and how they kind of play out. But it is concerning to me where things are going. I think we've passed a point where there's too many zealots in those positions that want to maintain power. And now they've realized that if we have free speech, if we have free speech, they can't get their way. Essentially, that's it, right? Because they're not doing things for the people. They're not for the people. None of them are. It's just how this works. They want power and they want profits. They're not for the people. And because we know that, anytime anything happens online, anytime anything happens anywhere, the online world eviscerates these people. So the truth gets told. It's just they're trying to make it smaller and smaller group. Like the other day, they were saying in the UK, they were going to arrest Elon Musk for inciting violence on his keyboard on Twitter. And I was like, that kind of shit. But again, my main point here is we've crossed a line where the government can no longer have control over what we think and what we say generally. And they realize that if we have that, they lose everything. So they're coming for us and they're not going to stop. This is not over. This is going to continue to get worse and worse and worse. And they're going to continue using tools like things that will self-censor you or things that will get you ostracized. They will run media campaigns and from every different angle that they can to make sure that they can sort of accomplish this goal. And I think what you're seeing in the UK, which we'll talk about briefly, I think that this is an example of where things start to go. So I'm of the opinion, you asked if we were dying by a death of 1,000 cuts. I would say yes. And I actually think that they will never let up.
So one thing that you were talking about there where it's kind of condensed in, say, when you read a book or something. So here's the stages that this kind of thought policing happens within societies when they go down this totalitarian path. First, it starts with a very social shaming aspect. In Maoist China, they called it struggle sessions. So this is where people within their own groups essentially mob anybody that didn't fit into that group think. The group itself would kind of self-police.
Right.
When that didn't get the results they wanted, they started putting in place thought reform, and that's where they would actually bring people in front of councils and mandate quote unquote re-education and check their thinking. We've actually even seen in the UK, police officers go up to somebody's door and say that they need to check their thinking for social media posts they made.
Same.
So this is the situation that Peterson is in, the thought reform stage. Once this doesn't get them the results they want is when they start building actual camps and forced labor and concentration camps in order to put dissenters in. So again, that's a year or two down the line. If there's no checking before they start building those kind of things, it'd probably be 3, 4, 5 years before they're operational in that sense. But that is the eventual path, is it happens very decentralized, social shaming, then it happens by committee, and then it happens by camp.
So what's interesting with, I know we're going a little off topic or kind of into the next one a little bit. You're saying they'll throw dissenters in jail. So there's a few people now in the UK that have already been tossed in jail for comments they made on Facebook last week. One guy just got 20 months for inciting violence because of the attack on the hotel where there were refugees there. And he was saying, show up and do this or execute, whatever it is, not execute, wrong word. Show up and do this or fight back or whatever. So they were saying you incited violence or hatred or whatever, 20 months in jail. There's another woman. I didn't see the sentencing for this. She's 55 and she made false claims about the man, the 17-year-old boy, I should say, who's of Rwanda he's Rwandan, but he's a UK citizen. That's the actual fact. I don't know if he was born in the UK, but that's the information that I have. She had made a false claim, and they're saying that you incited all this violence because you made a false claim about this. She's also going to prison. So it is happening. It is happening there. And so it's like, when I say that they're not going to give up, that's the future right there.
Well, let's look into that. So we've got the UK riots bringing George Orwell's 1984 to life. As social unrest spreads across the United Kingdom, the response from the newly elected Starmer government is eerily reminiscent of Orwell's dystopian nightmare. We're witnessing the rise of a two-tier justice system where dissent is met with harsh penalties and the government employs widespread surveillance to keep its citizens in check. The parallels to Orwell's vision don't stop there. Britain has launched a full-scale propaganda campaign, publicly shaming those who dare to speak out, reminiscent of the 2 minutes hate, in a bid to instill fear and enforce submission. This isn't just about controlling the streets, it's about controlling thoughts and ultimately the truth itself. So is Britain on the brink of civil conflict, or are we witnessing the birth of a new, more sophisticated form of totalitarianism?
I think both. I think they're both going to happen because I don't think you're going to get one without the other because enough people are already pushing back. So the way I see this is cat's out of the bag. So UK citizens are pissed off with the immigration and with the refugee status and everything else that's going on there. Sure, they get it wrong sometimes, but it doesn't really matter. Enough bad things have happened and enough bad things are happening in their society where they're not supported. They only support the immigrants right now. This kid, I don't give a fuck where he's from. Kid killed 3 little girls, stabbed them. 10 other were stabbed. Anyway, that's only one instance. A lot more have happened. Like you saw what happened in Leeds and all these other places there right now. So I'm of the mind now that they've got 2 warring factions. You saw what all the people from Muslim descent were doing in the streets and the cities. They were beating up people. They were attacking them. There were mobs. They were getting pretty violent. It's pretty crazy. And then the counter protesters were also calling for murder. One of the councilmen had to step down because he called for murder of people that were protesting it. And then someone from Amnesty International was there cheering him on. I'm going, look, this is all a big mess because you've got people from every corner right now. You've got the government who really is ultimately responsible for this, which you did a video that was good. That kind of highlighted why they're responsible. Then you've got the Muslims and a lot of the other people, foreigners, let's call them. Then you've got your UK citizens, who the ones that are pissed off with the immigration, and then you got people that are counter protesting the UK citizens themselves, who are also from the United Kingdom. What do you think's going to happen? This is going to continue on, right? Because no one's going anywhere. These people are going to continue fighting with these people. One more incident, and you're going to watch this thing blow up 10x. So I'm of the mind this is going to get far worse, and it's because they're trying to implement a new form of totalitarianism.
Well, I want to give a little bit of the backstory to the stuff that led up to this, because for the last couple decades, there already has been a 2-tier justice system within the UK. And even Rishi Sunak himself, the prior prime minister before Starmer got in, he admitted that the reason that some of the British Pakistani Muslim gangs weren't being prosecuted, which was a major issue. This was not just a few isolated incidents. There was actually one gang in particular that was responsible for up to 1,400 abuses of children.
Wow.
1,400. So
You
this
just got to
is
go clean house with those. This is so stupid.
But even an independent review as well said, quote, several counselors interviewed believed that by opening up these issues, they could be, quote, giving oxygen to racist perspectives that might in turn attract extremist political groups and threaten community cohesion. So let me ask you, what is more likely to stir up extremist groups, like, let's say, people, whether they be white supremacists or white nationalists, anything of that nature? What is more likely to get them upset? You sweeping other cultures abusing children under the rug, or you saying, hey guys, we understand that you're upset about this. We also have some issues with you on our own, but don't worry, we're handling this. And then handling it, saying, look, we are going to be cracking down on these groups that are doing these things. When you ignore those issues, you are only going to bubble up that quote unquote extremist political groups from that other side. And this is what I was pointing out in that video, and not many people seemed to understand this, is because I gave the analogy of, imagine society like a ship, and you've got culture, which is the compass of that ship. It tells you where you're pointing north, essentially you're good and bad, right? Sure. So where you should be headed. And so some people would be like, well, multiculturalism worked. One girl fucking lost her mind on me and said, I grew up in Scarborough and therefore multiculturalism works. First of all, Scarborough has its own culture. We all know it has Scarborough speak. So it's like, despite, again, this is the difference between multi-ethnicity and multicultural.
Yes.
Because there are certain cultures that do blend very well together and have a lot of overlap. Let's say, even from, say, a theological perspective, Buddhism and Christianity have a lot in common. If you put 100 Buddhists and 100 Christians in the same group, it's going to be a big love fest.
Well, you also have too, like, cultural mix. Go to Europe, you'll see a lot of them. There's a lot of a lot of those countries that are close. I know some don't, but a lot of them mix well together.
So, and then we've got sometimes though. So if two cultures, compasses, so to speak, both point towards the same direction, they're good. There's not going to be much overlap or much issue there. However, if you get a group in there that has a different compass, that has a different North Star of where everything should be headed, it's inevitably going to lead to conflict, because you're going to be fighting over the helm, which would be the political apparatus, and you're going to be fighting over it to say our ship, our society needs to go this direction. And that's exactly what you're seeing right now in this Western world, where you're starting to see Islamicists. Again, this does not apply to every single Muslim. This is Islam as an ideology, not as a group of people. It isn't compatible with Western values.
And I'm learning about that more and more, how incompatible it actually is.
Yeah. So, we've got, one of the fundamental values to Western culture is freedom of speech. But then what do you see when people like, say, Salman Rushdie don't go along with the Islamic narrative? They end up getting stabbed on stage. It's the same thing that you ended up seeing with the cartoonists that drew
Charlie Hebdo.
That drew the Prophet Muhammad. When they did that, they got killed. And that's because within the Islamic value system, you're not allowed to criticize the Prophet Muhammad at all, which ironically leads to a whole nother bag of issues, because Muhammad married a 9-year-old girl. And now you're seeing places like Iraq try to make it legal for people to marry 9-year-olds, because, well, how could we have something illegal that our prophet did? Our prophet was extremely holy, above criticism. So therefore nothing he did could be criticized. And so,
but it just goes to show how incompatible those two are. I don't need to go too far down that issue. It's pretty clear to most of us that is stark incompatibility. You're going to have these problems. I think your analogy is good. People that didn't get it I think people that don't get those kinds of things are just they're trying to find confirmation bias within your conversation when they're not going to find it, because you're actually very rational, especially with that kind of stuff.
And so one thing that I was thinking about, I just read a book called The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon, who was a French psychologist in the 1700s. And one thing that he talked about was when people get into collective groups, the individual psychology, like the individual disappears and they essentially surrender themselves to the collective conscience.
Right.
And that's where you get these battles. Because yes, if you put, say, one Muslim person in a room with us, chances are we're going to get along very well.
1-to-1 is pretty easy to get along with anybody unless they're a psychopath.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you put people into these large groups, which we've been doing with immigration for decades now, and there's no assimilation at all,
No.
then what you end up having is you have two groups that aren't actually made up of individuals anymore because they've surrendered themselves to their tribe, essentially, and those tribes will go into war.
Absolutely. We're very much on the same page. But then it kind of begs the question, and it's a leading question a little bit, but it kind of begs the question. This is all pretty simple stuff. You and I understand this. History shows us this stuff, and you can see live examples of it constantly over the last, like you said, couple decades in the UK. So if you know this is going to happen, you know you're going to have these warring factions that I just kind of explained. Why would you do it? Unless, of course, you're using that to implement policy, legislation, and take more power. Can you think of another reason?
Not really. At the very least, it's becoming a scenario, whether they wanted to craft it this way or not, it's becoming a scenario that they're taking advantage of because, yeah, you see the totalitarian crackdown that they've done now where you've got Keir Starmer announcing that they're going to use AI technologies and facial scanning in order to, did you see actually they just made it so that even if you're curiously observing the protests from the side, you are just as guilty as anybody.
And you can get jail time.
Yes.
Yeah. Like I think, did it say up to 10 years?
So you can get up to 10 years for rioting, up to 5 years for violent disorder, up to 10 years for criminal damage, or up to 7 years for inciting racial hatred. And fucking, you know it too. That thing that I just gave about Islam and the ideology of Islam, not actual Muslims themselves, that right there would, under their rules, 100% classify as inciting racial hatred.
And this is going to get really weird too soon because like these are subjective situations now, and I don't care what anybody says. The courts get their marching orders from government. It's just how things go, especially in the States. You see that it's partisan completely, right? So you look at that and you kind of go, if they're getting the orders here on what to do, and this language is very subjective. Pretty much, if you participate in any of these things in any way, shape, or form, or say things like you just did, which to me was factual, and I think you did a good job of contextualizing it. If that's going to be a problem, guess who's not going to say anything? You're either going to have full-on revolution or a very quiet and subservient society.
Well, because when you have ideology overtake logic and rationality within a society, and freedom of speech dies, truth becomes agreeing with the prevailing ideology. And that's what you're seeing right now with this woke social justice stuff. Anything that goes along with their narrative is true, and anything that is of dissident nature is wrong. It's wrongthink. And it doesn't matter whether it's factual or not. It's just whether it fits within their worldview.
Yeah, I mean, I think we know a lot of this has been going on for a while. But all this woke nonsense, it was kind of like everyone needs a slap in the mouth. That's how it felt prior to COVID. But boy, did they ever get a lot of momentum through COVID, and not the woke stuff, but the control and getting everybody to buy into the narrative. And this is the one truth. And I think they recognize like, oh, people are weak right now. We can absolutely pounce.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a lot of control over these people. The amount of compliance that they were able to gain through that pandemic by just skewing their own data. I was like, oh, these people know that society's weak right now, which kind of begs the question, will society, so okay, we're at this tipping point. Will society actually step up and do anything? Will they? Because obviously we outnumber government and military significantly. And I actually think a lot of people in the military too would be like, this is dumb, we're not doing this, especially if there's enough of a pushback. But do you actually think society has it in them? Do they have the will? Do they have the capacity? Do they have whatever it takes to actually, and I mean enforce change, because we're getting to that point?
I'm both skeptical and hopeful at the same time, because I don't think we're there right now. I don't think there's enough popular opinion for that. But there was actually another book by Matthias Desmet. It's called The Psychology of Totalitarianism. And to your point about the whole COVID thing, I realize that is so pivotal to everything they're doing right now, because the first stage of totalitarianism from a psychological perspective is isolation. So people become extremely isolated, and then because of that, they start becoming more and more anxious. And then the government puts itself forward as the solution to all of those anxieties, is give us power and control. We'll shape the outer world that you're anxious about in order to give you more safety and more comfort, right?
Yes, it's their standard, we create the problem, we give you the solution scenario.
Right.
Got it.
And so actually what he said, the psychologist that wrote this book, what he said is the only hope that once society has reached that point is to change. You can't get rid of people's anxieties, but the only hope would be to change people's direction of that anxiety towards the totalitarian regime itself.
Right. Use it for good, in a sense.
Yeah, you don't try to get rid of people's anxieties, but direct it towards the real threat, which is the state. And so that's what we're doing. And in a sense, I guess you can be hopeful in the idea that more and more people do seem to be waking up to this. But every time I think about this too, I just go to the opposite side of Twitter and I look at them, and you can just see people right now celebrating like Keir Starmer and thinking, oh my God, he's such a great leader. I'm so glad that we have because he used to be a lawyer, a prosecutor of some sort, high up. He was like the number one in the country. And I'm so glad we've got this tough person that's willing to impose the law on these far right white nationalist Nazis. And we're not talking about just obscure people either. These are people getting tens of thousands of views on their tweets and lots of support and engagement. And so it is crazy to see, yes, on the other side, there is a lot of people that are just egging this shit on.
Well, I think a lot of times people get brainwashed by partisanship. My side says this. So I'm a liberal, not a liberal, but if I'm a liberal and this is my thought process, these are the things that are important. We're pro-immigration, we're pro-open borders. So that's what we stand for. I don't care if it's ruining the economy, little girls are getting stabbed. I don't care if I can't put food on the table. I don't care if I can't get a job. I don't care if I'm getting raped in the city. Everything's fine. That's all fine because I'm pro-immigration. They don't think about the consequences of what's happening. They just buy into the partisanship. It's very, very dangerous. I think if people don't become more aware of the reality and stop playing the game of partisanship first, then they're not going to turn this over. There's no chance. I don't think you're going to get enough of a buy-in. But it's how do you get people to think rationally? How do you get them to think logically? Because it seems so much easier to play a game of mass psychosis than it is to actually get people to open their fucking eyes.
I don't think you can really get people to think logically. As humans, we're not designed to think logically. We're story processors. And so depending on the story that people have in their mind, this is where that whole theology and religion aspect really comes in. But depending on what worldview is undergirding that, because it still rationally fits, a lot of their decisions still rationally fit into their worldview when they've got this very social justice woke ideology where, say, empathy is their guiding principle. As long as they are quote unquote empathetic, it's a fake kind of empathy in a sense, because it does the exact opposite of what you're proclaiming. It's I care so much about the world. We're going to do all of these things, despite if every one of those decisions we implement ends up making it worse for everybody I'm so empathetic towards.
That's exactly. So it's the same thing. I see this at scale with the Liberals in Canada. They've been in charge of the country for 10 years. It's a dumpster fire. Everything is a mess. Everything you look at, there's a problem everywhere you look. And people are just like, yeah, well, we need to vote Liberal. Guys. Everything they've done for 10 years has buried this country. Our social programs that people stand behind are garbage. Our healthcare is garbage. Our education system is garbage. So none of the things that their policies are supposed to do are even remotely effective. It's just making life worse for everyone. And that's the thing. It's like, how can anybody look? You and I say this all the time. I'm not liberal or conservative. I definitely consider myself more libertarian, but in general, I'm agnostic. I don't care. It's what makes sense, because that's unfortunately how you have to play this game. How can people at scale, like this is one thing, immigration is one thing we're talking about, which is horrific over in the UK. It's creating a lot of problems. But I'm talking about the whole country in Canada is a disaster under liberal rule right now. And now we've got basically a full liberal Senate. So how are people not going, oh yeah, wait a minute. This whole country has gotten significantly worse pretty much every day since he's been in office, yet they're still going to vote for the guy. It literally makes no sense to me.
When you start, realizing that a lot of people just are genuinely insane. And I actually believe that. And more too, once you start understanding the effects of propaganda, we were talking about it in regards to Kamala Harris, where nobody liked her 3 months ago, and now all of a sudden she's legitimately one of the most loved people on the left, and just instantly turned the entire public perception of this person around within 2 or 3 weeks.
It's amazing. It's what an amazing tool. It's such a weapon they have. And you see all these videos that are disparaging of her because of all the things she said and done. But nope, those get no air. It's just the import. She's just the queen now.
Yeah. And
Wow.
so, and this is part of it too, is that humans have a really hard time discerning between truth and repetition. So if something gets repeated long enough, people tend to believe it.
Yeah.
And so when you've got these billion-dollar propaganda machines and media outlets that are centrally controlled at this point, especially in Canada, because they are just controlled by our government, they're dependent on our government.
Yeah, we have no equal representation in this country, not even remotely equal in this country.
Then all you need to do is just say something over and over and over and over and over again. Climate change is the perfect example.
Right.
The majority of people, if you walk up to them on the street and ask them if they think that climate change is an existential risk to humanity, most of them will say yes. But if you ask them, what does the future look like in a world? Let's say all of your predictions are true. What does the world look like in 2 decades from now? Nobody will know. They've never actually thought about these things. Okay, is it going to be a desert wasteland? No, because actually everything on planet Earth is getting greener. Okay, everybody's going to die by climate disasters. No, actually, for the last 100 years, 96% of climate-related deaths have just been erased. And so all of these things, there's no actual logic to back them up. They've just heard so many times over and over and over again, climate change is an existential risk, and they take it as truth.
I think you go one step further and just be like, okay, what proof do you have?
Yeah.
Tell me why you believe that. Zero. Crickets, bro, all
nothing.
day. There's going to be nothing. No, not at all. So I totally agree with you. I just think that, I mean, just to kind of wrap up that point, it's just, I think it puts society at a very significant disadvantage when things like this happen because they're basically brainwashed, but you need everybody to unite to actually make change. And because they have those tools and they've got people to buy into, like the propaganda and everything, they got them to buy into this ideology. I don't know. I just don't think that, I don't think enough people are united to actually turn this around. And I think there's going to be a couple of significant examples. I like that word today, significant. There's going to be a lot of big examples of things like this. And I think UK right now looks like it's the poster child.
Yeah, it's only going to get worse because they're not dealing with the underlying issue, which is the immigration policies and the two-tier justice.
Again,
right?
it's let's okay, so let me be clear. Let's see what the UK does for policy implementation. That's the important thing right now. Okay, they started a dumpster fire. We all agree they started a dumpster fire. You and I are we. So we agree they started a dumpster fire by knowing these warring factions were going to start and how to get everybody going and how to get them riled up and then start throwing people. They knew what they were doing. Now the policy starts. Like you said, the AI facial recognition, the throwing people in jail for thought crimes or saying something on social media. Now you're getting 10 years in prison if you go to a protest. You just wait. And this is just going to keep going.
And they're talking about extraditing people too now.
Yes,
right?
they're going to extradite Elon Musk to the UK. You just buy the whole fucking country, tell them to shut up. So this is where this goes. You watch these. I'm telling you, something else is going to happen. Some other kids are going to get killed by some immigrant this time. Maybe not someone from Rwanda. I don't really care. All I'm saying is these problems are going to keep happening. And you're going to see more and more policy. It's going to be more and more egregious, more censorship, more totalitarian kind of in nature. That'll be interesting to see because, again, they're a few years ahead of us. So that'll be what I watch to just see how far this goes and to see what society's willing to do. I think they're going to burn.
Yeah, well, I think the best way to put it would be that the powder keg has already been built and it's sitting there and it's ready to explode. It's already on fire right now. The Rwandan kid, he was born in Wales. I believe that this is to the best of my knowledge, he was born in Wales to parents that immigrated to Britain. So he himself was British.
Yeah.
And apparently the family was Christian. So it wasn't actually Muslim. But this is the thing, is that these instances have been happening so long. It's not like everything was going along great. This one stabbing occurred and then everybody was like, it's the Muslims.
Not at all.
It's been for 10 to 15 years. There has been these instances of Muslim grooming gangs, which again, their own government, their own prime minister admitted that the police were doing nothing about because of political correctness. And so this just ended up becoming essentially the spark.
It boiled over. Yes.
But it wasn't the bomb.
Not at all. And it's going to continue.
Yeah. All right, so moving on to our own issues with this. Conservatives call for emergency meeting after ISIS militants in Canada were charged in a terror plot. The Conservatives are calling for an emergency committee meeting to address how Ahmed Fuhad Mustafa El-Didi, a man linked to ISIS, was admitted to Canada and granted citizenship. El-Didi, 62, and his son Mustafa El-Didi, 26, are charged with multiple terrorism offenses, including conspiracy to commit murder for a terrorist group. The father-son duo was arrested in Richmond Hill, Ontario last month, accused of planning a violent attack in Toronto. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has criticized Prime Minister Trudeau's government for allegedly failing to vet individuals properly, highlighting that El-Didi had previously been filmed dismembering a prisoner for ISIS. Poilievre and other conservatives argue that this case reveals a significant lapse in national security and have called for the Public Safety Committee to be urgently recalled to investigate how El-Didi was allowed into Canada and if other individuals with similar backgrounds are also in the country. So how are we supposed to have faith in our immigration systems while terrorists have their citizenship papers signed by government officials?
Well, we can't, right? And I think that that's the biggest problem that we have right now with our current government. Like I say, there's two things we have to curb immediately or Canada's in real trouble. One is government spending. The other is immigration. And look, this is not the only guy and not going to be the only one. And here's how we know. They're letting people in. So before they let people in at a rate of about 250,000 a year, right? Permanent residents. Non-permanents were significantly lower than they are now too. So if you more than double that, you increase it by more than double, but our bureaucracy and government workers are highly inefficient. But anyway, you more than double that. You don't have the infrastructure to manage your background checks effectively. If you're letting in 1.5 million people a year, and your system used to only let in a third of that, probably even around there, there's just no way you got the manpower and the resources and the systems in place to effectively manage that. So this is one guy. There are dozens, guaranteed, if not more.
Yeah. And this is another issue with multiculturalism, is that you can't properly crack down on these sorts of scenarios, just like we were seeing with the UK, where they say they wouldn't dig into things out of fear of being politically incorrect, is that you have two enforcement mechanisms within society to drive behavior, which is law and you have culture.
Yeah.
And so we're doing it both on our end for white people.
Yes.
You'll face both a legal and a cultural wrath if you don't behave properly as a white person. But then within other cultures, the legal arm isn't being mechanized against them out of fear of politicians being labeled politically incorrect. And then you're also not having the cultural aspect.
Yeah, if anything, they're being bolstered or supported. Like I remember the one pro-Palestine protest, and the guy's in the Eaton Centre Mall, downtown Toronto, and he's threatening, he's got his mask on, of course, that's what these people like to do. He's threatening to murder someone right in front of a cop. Nothing happens. He gets to walk away. I go, what? If you let that, you're condoning that behavior at that point. You're saying this is okay for you guys to do. You can say and do what you want in a public space in front of a police officer who should have ultimate authority in those situations. We're going to do whatever you want. Where do you think this goes? Like back to our conversation about the UK. Where do people think this goes? You know what? It's. I really hope that terror attacks never get executed. Obviously, you never want to see anything bad like this happen. But this is happening a lot in the West right now. You saw they foiled how many terror plots did they foil in the UK recently? Not just the UK, sorry, Europe. There was one, I forget exactly where it was in Europe. 2 young kids who had been radicalized by Islam. And they were associated with ISIS and maybe the Taliban or something similar in that realm. And they were just like, their mission, kill as many people as possible. Like, guys,
want to hear a crazy stat? And this has been reported even by the BBC. More immigrants to to Britain have converted and joined terror groups than the British military.
Wow. I don't know how they can fact check that, but just the idea of that is pretty insane. Like, I don't know where your sample size, I don't know how you actually compile your data effectively, but that's wild. But here's my problem with this kind of stuff. This sort of pushback against a lot of, it's weird. It's weird because the worlds are colliding a little bit, right? Like the extremists, a lot of them are coming from the left right now. And a lot of them, the thing that's happening right now in today's world is the left-wing kids are being told that our society's bad, Canada's bad, the United States is bad. Don't use a flag. If you're waving a Canadian flag, then you're a white supremacist. That was, I remember, through the pandemic. Same thing in the United States. Like, hey, if someone's waving their American flag, you know who they're voting for. Well, that's insane. But you do. You actually do. That's fucking bananas. But you kind of know this. So here's what happens. If you tell all these young kids who, when you're young, when you're under 25, for the most part, you're a little more idealistic. So you're more likely to be in the liberal sphere, the socialist sphere. That's going to happen. Now, if the things that you're telling these kids are the West is bad and capitalism is bad and this all needs to fall and we need to radicalize and supporting all these pro-Palestinian protests and all doing all these things, what do you think is going to happen? They become, okay, well then we need to be the antithesis of this. We need to fight back against this. We need to join these groups that are creating these terror plots. It's exactly what, like, you're putting them, you're literally walking these kids right into their hands. And this is what's concerning for me is there's this whole, like, we need to be liberal and we need to be democratic and we need to do this and have open borders and all this stuff. And the West is bad and we all need to suffer for it. And then kids get radicalized. It's not the far right. Look, I know that there's, like you said, there's bad apples in every bunch. This stuff though, this stuff is coming from the left. 100%. This is because of bad political ideology in the West. And this is what we're getting. And here's the issue you're going to have. Yes, the immigration is going to be a problem. But these kids are getting radicalized by it because they're told that everything they knew is a problem. Okay, so how much bigger can your police force get? How many more terror plots can they foil? Because they can't keep knocking these out of the park. I think they get lucky a lot of times. But I think this is going to continue to rise and grow. And I think we have a tough 5 to 10 years ahead of us with a lot of violence. That's what I actually think. It's a little hard sometimes.
So let's even just think about easy rhetoric, right? What comes out of left-wing ideology? And for anybody and this is actually something, is because you do get people saying that liberalism is part of left-wing. It's really not. Left-wing thought is characterized as progressivism, Marxism, socialism, and communism. That's what fits into leftist ideology. And they're all the fucking same. There's no real distinction between them. Anyways.
They almost just feel like a progression of one another.
Yeah, they are. Actually, funny term is, so progressives is what communists used to call themselves whenever it wasn't socially acceptable to be a communist.
Right.
It was like literal Stalinists and stuff in America. Whenever the social attitude was very anti-communist, they would just declare themselves progressives, right, so that they didn't have to say they were communists. So anyways, very much the same. But let's look at the rhetoric that comes out of that camp. White colonialists are to blame for all of the problems and inequalities in the world. And then when you look at, say, certain radicalized groups, like let's say what's happening in Palestine, they'll say that these decolonization efforts, such as on October 7th, aren't terrorism, they're justified resistance to white colonialism, right? You put those two thoughts together, white people are bad, anything they do is bad, and all negative outcomes in the world are their fault, and these people are good, anything they do in order to combat those white people is permissible. What do you think is going to happen? That is literally kill whitey.
Jeez, it's exactly it. It's just so wild that we've gotten to this point. But again, this is going to keep happening with open borders and a very broken ideology. This just keeps getting worse. But I go back to the same thing we were talking about in the UK and correcting course. If enough people believe that that's the solution, we don't fix this. If anything, we see civil war.
Yeah, it's scary times and seeing it really play out for real there. All right, moving on. We've got Liberal MP blames far right and Trump after women storm out due to Liberal actions. Earlier this week, Liberals drove 2 survivors of abuse out of a parliamentary committee meeting in tears. Anita Vandenbeld diverted the discussion to abortion rights, leading to heated exchanges. Alexander's mother accused the Liberal MPs of re-victimizing the survivors for political gain. Despite the survivors' attempt to focus on their testimonies, the discussion went off track, causing further distress. In response, Liberal MP Vandenbeld penned a lengthy piece blaming the rise of the far right in her 2,500-word op-ed published in National Newswatch. Vandenbeld claimed she was the target of abuse and blamed far-right populism for the incident. She accused conservatives of following Trump's playbook, suggesting that conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's narrative of a broken parliament mirrors Trump's tactics. Vandenbeld now claims to be a victim of online abuse and threats, leading her to close her constituency office due to safety concerns. She criticized media headlines and linked the incident to a broader global rise in authoritarian, anti-democratic, and misogynist movements. Vandenbeld expressed deep regret for the distress caused to witnesses, describing the situation as a trap that unfairly impacted the survivors. So are any of the Liberal Party members capable of acknowledging personal responsibility?
So first, I want to be rude and say that this woman's a fucking moron. Every time liberal politicians push their harmful agenda and things fall apart, they don't take any responsibility. They don't apologize. They just blame the far right and somehow Trump. This is absolutely mental. The refusal to face reality is delusional. And this woman, it really epitomizes their incompetence. I find it very, very frustrating. But again, they have the megaphone. So that's the only story that gets out. That's the one, right? And that's why we have a problem. So everyone's saying the rise of the far right and all this violence. What has happened to this woman? Why are these far right people in jail? If you're throwing far right people in jail in Canada, well, they're on the front of the newspaper, aren't they? Because that fits your narrative. So where are they? Show me the violence. Because all I see is left-wing pro-Palestinians painting shit all over their walls of the immigration minister and threatening him. That's what I'm seeing.
That also got blamed on far-right people. Of course it did. This was the issue of far-right rhetoric. It's no. Those are pro-Palestine messages.
So
How is this our fault?
So my
I'm
point,
not even, actually, I say our, but I want to distinction. Like anybody who opposes these people is far-right, according to them.
So my problem is they just keep saying this rhetoric and there's no proof in the pudding. No one's in any trouble. No one's making any threats. There's no real violence. They would sensationalize this to no end. So for me, look, this is just nonsense rhetoric. They need to stop saying this. And the reason I'm saying you're not seeing any of it is just so people kind of realize like, oh yeah, that's just a stupid thing they keep saying to try to get away with stupid shit that they do. Yeah, that's what this is. Look, I don't know what else you do about it though. As long as people like this are in power and they have control of the media, what's your answer? What's your response?
Yeah, and I'm so tired of this attempt to try to, they'll constantly try to blame people like Poilievre for importing right-wing populist politics into Canada, right? Like they'll say that, or there was that one instance of that reporter saying that, he's taking a page right out of Trump's playbook. She's trying to say the same thing about him here. Pierre Poilievre and Donald Trump are two insanely different types of people.
Wildly different.
Even from a personality perspective, Trump is essentially a 13-year-old bully. Like he's very effective at it as well. The name calling, the weaponizing, all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's not really Pierre calls Trudeau a wacko, but that's not the same as, say, weaponizing nicknames for every single person he comes across. Then also too, I've actually seen now the Liberal Party of Canada is really starting to try to become fearmongers about abortion rights in Canada. You're like, there is no one's having this conversation. You're making a boogeyman. There is no large scale push in Canada to take away abortion rights for women.
There's no political backing. It's not happening at all. It's insane.
And I saw the Liberal Party posted something on Twitter the other day about they took one conservative MP who was being interviewed, and the conservative MP was asked whether they would look at abortion rights in Canada, and he said nothing is off the table. And they used this as an excuse to say, well, okay, this is obviously the conservatives are going to take away your thing. And you're like, again, there is no large-scale push for abortion changes in Canada. And
there's no appetite for it. No one supports it. Even in America, 70 people support abortion.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Just no one cares. It's just dumb because the liberals have nothing else to stand on. But the audacity of this woman to bring that up during this interview or whatever it was with these women that had been obviously clearly abused. There's a better word than inappropriate, but that's what it is.
Yeah. But it is ridiculous. And there is no analogy to be made or comparison to be made between Canada's conservative feelings and America's conservative feelings. Because again, you do have certain regions down in the States, like the Bible Belt, for instance, where it is dominated by evangelical Christians, and they would be very happy to see Christianity pushed through the government and have it enforced nationwide, its principles. But there is nothing like that in Canada. So, but you know what is funny is You can make very, very good comparisons between our Liberal Party and Trudeau and all this kind of stuff and the progressives down in the States and their left-wing leaning parties, because they are identical. They are actually working off of the same exact, whether it's...
They're actually using the same playbook.
Yeah. Literally, Agenda 2030.
Yes, exactly, yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly where we're going to go. Yeah,
So it's complete insanity.
But I just this double speak nonsense. So what I've come to realize with the liberals, and you and I live in the space of calling this shit out. That's what we do, primarily, really. They know that they can say whatever they want. They know that they've got control over the media. They can say whatever they want, and they can victimize themselves as the problem versus take responsibility. These people need to be out of politics. These people need to slap in the face. I don't know how else you manage it, but like, if people like this continue running our country, there will be nothing left.
Yeah. I completely agree. All right, moving on to our next story. We've got the WHO director considering declaring public health emergency over monkeypox outbreak. The World Health Organization is considering declaring a monkeypox emergency amid a breakout in Africa, but this move seems more about drumming up money and power than actual public health needs. The WHO director has called for increased funding and a full-scale response, including more public health measures, surveillance, community engagement, and vaccine deployment. As of now, no formal emergency declaration has been made. Tedros hinted at possibly convening an emergency committee to review the situation. So is monkeypox a legitimate threat to public health?
Statistically, no, it doesn't seem that way. The mortality rate's dropping, which is what happens anytime a disease has an opportunity to sort of infiltrate society. You have a higher mortality rate, and then the bodies figure out how to adjust and adapt. And obviously, the weak and old die. That's life. Sorry, it is what it is, right? And then once the mortality rate starts to drop off significantly, which it has, no, it's literally not a threat. No, it's not. This is, to me, a money and power grab.
And actually, too, Brett Weinstein, evolutionary biologist, pointed this out as well, is that when viruses mutate, and they have two chances, they can start putting their eggs into the basket of transmissibility.
Yes.
I want to infect more people, or it can be deadly, but it's not both. And they won't do that. And so even if it is, okay, maybe the population is becoming more resilient to these diseases, or maybe also the disease itself is becoming less severe.
Well, that's exactly what you're saying. 160% cases are up 160%, but deaths are only up 19%.
Mm-hmm.
So that's exactly what it's very clear. This shows transmissibility. It's exactly what's happening here. So again, I just think this emergency push is more for resources and influence than actually addressing an immediate crisis.
One thing that I've started thinking about in politics is where's the line to any of these things? Because we create bureaucracies in order to deal with an issue, but okay, when will that issue be solved in your books?
Where's the goalpost?
Same thing I think about in terms of even social movements.
I notice it more.
Let's say it's the pride thing. It's like, okay, I was on board with legalizing gay marriage if two dudes wanted to get married or two women wanted to get married and live their life together. I saw no issue with that. But now the issue that I'm seeing is once that goalpost is removed, then it's on to the next thing. Then it becomes bake the fucking cake. Remember when that was a thing. Now you have to adhere and have to accommodate, say, gay marriages, even if it goes against your religion. Now we've gotten to the point where, okay, sex changes for kids,
sex changes for kids. It's gender game now. And now also, if you go to the Pride Parade now, there's just man dicks out while people that are throwing swinger parties are trying to convince kids to come with them.
Mm-hmm.
The police call, it's for everybody's good. No, we're not doing any harm here. Whoa, you moved that goalpost and you've gone way too far.
Exactly.
Wow.
So then think about it too, and you go, what's the next goalpost after that? And it's the same thing with public health, right? It's okay, we need to focus on this disease, but okay, when are you going to be happy after its eradication?
Well, I think one thing to consider too with these global organizations, take the WHO, World Health Organization. So what's their job? They got to be tackling a health crisis. So there always has to be one, or else they don't need to exist. So there always needs to be more. And as they grow and the bureaucracy grows, well, there needs to be more work. So I've had construction companies before. You hire on guys. If you have your own team of guys, you just have to keep picking up work because you want to keep them busy. You want to be building houses, but sometimes you just take renovation jobs because, well, fuck, I got to keep these guys going because now I'm responsible for your livelihood. It's not a sub guy. It's not like it's my plumber. I just sub him in. It's my guys work for me full time and I'm paying them X number of dollars a year. I need to find jobs. I need to keep going. Well, your bureaucracy, you get so big. Your budget's only so big. You need problems. You need to create your own issues. Or else what the fuck are we doing here? Swearing a lot today. You're welcome. Same thing with NATO. They're a war. They're war hungry. That's what they do. They need war. That's exactly the military-industrial complex. Like, these people need war to exist. The WHO needs health crisis to exist. So that's also something I take into consideration when they do stuff like this.
Yeah. And we like to think that as soon as they aren't, say, operating on a private motive, I guess the WHO would be considered a nonprofit? What would it be?
I don't think it's I don't think it's profit based, but some of the people in there might be profit driven. They may be. I don't know if they get kickbacks on patents or anything like that. I'm not 100% sure. That could be on the individual level. But the way I see it is generally it's a power and authoritarian power group that is a global governing body. So there's a lot of interest in making sure they maintain power. I just see that as like also, they're used by a lot of governments as basically a screen, a filter, so they can implement policy that is completely out of line. But the WHO said it, so they kind of use them as a tool in that sense as well.
It's classified as a United Nations specialized agency.
Right.
But yeah, just the point I was trying to make is just because there's not a profit incentive to somebody doesn't mean that there isn't, that they're not still, or they don't have to still adhere to the exact same mechanisms like you were pointing out within construction of being like, well, there's got to be a reason for us to exist. Otherwise, we got to get rid of people. And me as a leader of this company, my primary goal is to not have to get rid of these people.
Right. So one of the things I would say too, with the WHO trying to implement this pandemic treaty that they failed, which they will try again, that to me is a sign that this governing body wants power. And whoever's in control of it, who are appointed from different world governments, this is a power grab. That's all this is. So while they may need to exist to do these construction jobs, their primary goal is power. And so they'll do whatever they need to do to keep busy, but this is the end game for them. So it's dark.
And I guess the last thing that I'll point out as well is just because I got to point out Marxism everywhere it exists, right? Is that the current director of the WHO, I think I did this along a couple episodes, or quite a few episodes ago, but pointed out how before he became the leader of the WHO, he used to work in Ethiopia as a government official under a Marxist party. So, this guy has been involved in that ideological realm for a long time. And actually, one very common thing among communists is that they believe that it needs to be a worldwide revolution. And so you look at all of these international organizations now headed by people with those beliefs. It's pretty terrifying to think about what they're trying to implement on that scale.
But it's also a signpost for us to understand what their goals are.
Mm-hmm. All right, next moving on, we've got World War III watch after Netanyahu threatens proactive attacks as Iran promises Israel's annihilation. So first, Netanyahu threatens provocative attack, warning Iran and Hezbollah of proactive attacks as tensions rise in the region. During a visit to an IDF induction base, Netanyahu assured citizens that Israel is prepared both defensively and offensively. This comes amid heightened fears of a second direct confrontation between the two arch foes as Iran's rhetoric grows increasingly aggressive. Then also you've got Hezbollah poised to strike Israel independent of Iran. So Hezbollah may soon strike Israel independently of Iran's plans, according to sources familiar with the intelligence. While Hezbollah is accelerating its preparations and could act in the coming days, Iran is still deciding on its response and has not completed all expected preparations for a major attack. Coordination between Iran and Hezbollah on their next step remains unclear, with concerns that their strategies might not align. So will this conflict in the Middle East spark World War III?
I think it has a good chance to. And I'll tell you why. So I'm actually just reading the news right now. And it says that the Israel intelligence community, this is 2 minutes ago, and this is on Sunday, August 11th. The Israel intelligence community believes that Iran has decided to launch a direct attack on Israel in retaliation for the killing of Hamas leader, and will do so within days. Axios reporter Barak Ravid said that the Iranian attack could occur on or before August 15th. So we're looking at a few days. They're definitely going to retaliate. And it's been interesting, right? So a lot of times you see these wars and like these unwritten rules. So Iran's been fighting a proxy war with Israel. That's what's happening, right? So whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's the Houthis, whether it's Hamas, it doesn't matter. They're arming these people. They're helping them fight. They're all Iran. They're well-known Iran proxies. No, not much different than maybe what the U.S. is kind of doing with Ukraine in terms of using them as a proxy. I don't agree with either of them, but it is what it is. Anyway, because you're seeing this, like we all knew this was happening, but there was no direct attacks on Iran because they're like, oh, we don't know what's going on. It's not really us, even though we know it is. So that's kind of like an unwritten rule. They allow that to happen, just like Russia allows America to fight the proxy war. But you can't put troops on the ground or it's a real problem. So anyway, I don't know why I wanted to put that context in. I just found it interesting. So there's definitely going to be some attacks directly. And as soon as Iran attacks, Israel's going to go back and it's going to be violent. And I think it's going to get really out of hand very quickly. What's interesting in terms of not interesting. So why I think this could turn into or kick off World War III. Well, for starters, World War III is probably already started. Like you've mentioned before, these large global wars start with proxy wars first in smaller countries. And we're already seeing that. But we're also seeing all the big countries get involved or at least say something or do something. So Russia's supporting Iran right now. They're giving them defense technology to use. It's out in the open. Everybody knows. Okay, so you've picked your side. We already know where China sits. They haven't said anything, but we know where they sit in this conflict. The U.S. has sent over a dozen F-18 fighter jets down and a number of resources. I'm not exactly sure what else that means, but I imagine it's manpower. I imagine it is. And if Iran attacks, the U.S. also said they warned them severely. So if Iran attacks, the U.S. If Iran attacks, the U.S. warned them for severe retaliation. So this will be a really big problem. Now, if Russia's involved, U.S. is involved. And because it's not their own countries, you may see Russian troops on the ground. You may see American troops on the ground. This could get out of hand very, very fast. Now, I think it also comes down to, and this may sound a little ridiculous, I think it also comes down to like, what does the actual global playbook say? What is the plan right now? If the plan's not for a bigger war, then it may not happen right away. But I think it could go a long way to continue stoking the fire. If that makes sense.
People will sit here and argue about who is to blame for what happened last week or something in, say, the Middle East, when in reality, these are all ripples that have been happening for over a century of foreign policy. You know, if, let's say, people will, I think there's more than enough to criticize Iran for. They've got a completely tyrannical regime that is enforcing Islam on its citizens to the point where they kill women for not dressing appropriately and such. So yes, there's no defending these nations. But when you look back and you realize that, okay, it was America that overthrew Iran's democratically elected government in the 1970s, which then led to this authoritarian regime. And then also, like, even something that you realize too is that since World War II, it's been America and the West, largely Britain being their main allies in this throughout it, but they've been the ones pushing for global hegemony of Western rule. And so what you realize is, because I was trying to figure out for the longest time, being like, why do Iran and Russia, why would they partner? Like, they seem to, even culturally, they seem to, like, there doesn't seem to be much allyship there that they would be able to bond over like the Western world does. But then you realize that it's really just like, hey, you're in a fight to maintain your independence. We're in a fight to maintain our independence. And it's this force, this Western force that is trying to establish global dominance that is threatening both of us. So therefore, let's become allies in order to maintain our independence.
It's the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah.
100%.
And so when you zoom out very far and you look at who's to blame for the current global tensions, it's America and the West.
A lot of it is. And here's the challenge you have, though. A lot of it is on America for sure. But then you have to ask yourself, do you need someone looking out for the rest of the world or not? Or do you just let things go and let things happen the way they are? And I think that's an interesting argument to have, because more and more I'm thinking leave everybody alone. But also you kind of need, there's this global power dynamic that's constantly happening. And because nations are on different tiers, if a big nation gets involved and no one else gets involved, so if China gets involved somewhere like in Taiwan and America doesn't get involved, well, then Taiwan's gone. So what do you do? And maybe that's not our business. Maybe that's not America's business. We're not American, but you know what I mean? But I think that's an interesting conversation to have, because I think there are instances where it is good to have, sort of someone to stand up for the world. But at the same time, you know what I mean? It becomes, that's where I get a little lost, to be honest with you, because I do think that America's done a lot of bad things and caused a lot of problems. And you can look at the history, like you said, even with Iran. But the challenge I have is like, where would the world be if they did nothing? And would it be worse?
You look at what happened in, say, South America with Arbenz in Guatemala. When America overthrew his regime, it led to the death of like double digits percentage-wise of their population by dictatorial rule. You look at what happened in Iraq. They said if they went in and got rid of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, that democracy would sweep through the region, which was actually very heavily lobbied by the Israeli government, who was pushing America to do this. They said, hey, if you come into the Middle East and just take out this one bad guy, everything democracy will reign. That's not what happened at all. Every single one of these places became worse off. You look at what America did when they allied with the Saudis in their war against Yemen. You've like, okay, hundreds of thousands of people dead. And so to me, you can kind of fantasize about this game where if we don't operate on the global stage, then it's just going to be bad people operating on the global stage. And it's better that we are the ones enforcing everything on in the globe than these other people. But there is no good and bad when you're playing the empire building game. And to me, it's like, you can't say, well, if we didn't do anything, and I'm not saying you in particular, I just mean this kind of idealized view about, say, Western imperialism, is, well, if we didn't do these terrible things, somebody else would do these terrible things. And to me, I'm like, yeah, but then shouldn't you try to keep your hands clean if this is the game?
So I think that's
played?
actually, so I think there's two things to look at there. One is, that is actually right though. If you don't, like, there's always a war over who can be the strongest country, right? Like, that's kind of how it goes, the superpower. China and America are the ones right now fighting over it. I would rather live with some semblance of democracy than live how China lives. So if I kind of go, if I had to take a pick, I would take America over China. So the other thing too to consider is, they've done a lot of horrible things. There's no question. I said that myself. I totally agree. But now we have there's this mutual understanding of assured destruction. Because America's done these things, because they're capable of doing these things, places like Taiwan have not been invaded yet. Places like Japan have allies. You know what I mean? So it's even the smaller countries, like even Israel in this case, and I don't want to pick and choose who's right and wrong down there. But what I mean is, they have American allies. So people think twice. How many things were avoided? How much more totalitarian rule was avoided because they knew that America was there with a big stick? And I don't have an answer to that. All we know is when they jumped in, there was mass casualties for sure, 100%. But what is the correlation on the number of lives that were maybe saved, or the fact that we don't live under a global totalitarian rule yet? And what was their contributing? How much did they contribute to that reality? And I don't know, but it's something to sort of think about, because objectively you can say, well, they did bad things, but then you go, okay, but what did that lead to? Did that create an understanding around the world, like we have with nuclear weapons? Hey, we're not going to do this because we know how this ends. And I'm wondering if America's put themselves in that position, and that's why Western democracy actually thrived for so long.
Well, this is kind of, again, to quote Nietzsche, he said, be careful when fighting monsters that you do not turn into a monster yourself. And so, yeah, you can argue that you'd rather a world led by America than China. But what if America has to become China in order to defeat China? And that's exactly what we're seeing right now with the Western world, is we are slowly getting down to this, even going back to what we saw in the UK with the implementation of these totalitarian measures and thought policing and mass surveillance. And you see the same thing happening in the West, whether it be the Patriot Act, is you're like, okay, we're going to enter this battle because we don't want that person to win. But if you just become that person, then the entire goal in the first place, to me, becomes invalid.
Right. I would agree, but I would also disagree, because I think there's a cyclical nature to it. There's a cyclical nature to power and to democracy and to empires. They fall, they change, they become more totalitarian. They always do in history. It always falls. Now it maybe shouldn't be America anymore. Maybe it needs to be somebody else that will maybe instill the same values they had centuries ago. And that's how we continue to keep this going. But you kind of need to prop up that one guy or that one country that will actually continue to enforce a legitimate democracy. I realize that what America's become, and that I think it's on its way down, but they have been able to maintain some semblance of democracy for quite some time. And this is obviously just a thought experiment. I don't actually know where this would have landed. I don't. It's theoretical. But I think that's part of the game, is no matter what, it's going to collapse on itself and become totalitarian or communist, or they're going to become the monster. I think it happens no matter what. It's just how long can you hold off? And then once you become the monster, that's why I say the empire needs to fall. And that's why I keep saying it these days, is because I think Canada and America have both become a monster in their own way. But if you look around and you look at the global game of this power struggle and how wars work and how just foreign policy and all this stuff, we still need someone minding the fence. We do, because look what's happening when you're letting all these other immigrants in these other countries. Look what's happening. You need someone minding the fence. It may be the lesser of two evils, I think is what I'm saying. Maybe.
Yeah, I don't think America had nearly as many enemies until they started playing the world building global dominance game.
Absolutely. Yeah. Totally agreed.
So yeah, it ends up being a diminishing return when you say that we're going to police the world for ours and everyone else's safety, when that actually ends up just getting you involved in more issues. Because nobody was looking to go to war with America before World War II.
No, I agree. We're on the same page.
All right, before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our Substack, where you can subscribe for original articles and exclusive podcasts, as well as more direct access to us. And we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.